Around 1138 to 1140, Waller de Beaumont, Count of Meulan and Earl of Worcester, granted land in the Arrow Valley to a group of Cistercian monks from Garendon Abbey in Leicestershire. As the land was very marshy and unsuitable for building, they built a complex drainage system and diverted the River Arrow. The Abbey had around 20 granges or farms in Worcestershire and Warwickshire, including Yule Grange in Tardybig. The Abbey was demolished in 1538 by Henry VIII during the dissolution of the monasteries, and the property was sold. Over the years, stone from the Abbey was used in other buildings in the area. Guy de Beauchamp, the 10th Earl of Warwick, was buried at Bordesley Abbey in 1315. He was known as the Black Dog of Arden, a nickname given to him by his enemy Piers Gaveston. It is also known that Guy was dark-skinned and had a swarthy appearance. It is said that Guy haunts the area in the form of a black dog. Ghostly monks have been seen all over Redditch, and most sightings have been around the Abbey ruins. This is a story from a Redditch man who emigrated to Australia.
I've seen the legless monks travelling down toward Bordesley Corner. One overcast but clear afternoon, about mid-1960, I was trout fishing in the little stream that feeds into the Arrow, the one that runs south behind the Bordesley Abbey site, when I caught a glimpse of two figures in cassocks heading down the road towards Bordesley Corner. The strange thing was that, although I had a clear view of the road from beneath the hedgerow, I could not see their legs, I could only see their head and shoulders. I have since found out that I am not the only person to see them.
Here is a more recent encounter from Stephen.
Around 2004, I noticed that a large branch had fallen from one of the horse chestnut trees, and a man was cutting it up with a chainsaw. On that evening, I took the dog for a walk over the meadows, accompanied by my wife and friend, who was staying with us for the week. I showed them the huge sections of logs, and my friend picked one up to take home for a craft project. As we were leaving, a hooded figure that looked like a monk walked towards us and just stared at us. You couldn't see the bottom half of his legs. It's like they were in the ground. As you can imagine, we ran.
Monks aren't the only ghosts that have been seen around the area, as James recalls.
Around 1992, myself and a friend took my dog for a walk around the meadows. We noticed a man with a dog walking towards us near the brick bridge. He was an old man wearing a hat. He approached us and said hello. After he walked past, my dog started acting strange, trying to pull away in the opposite direction of the man and dog. Unusual for him, as he liked to greet everyone. As I turned around to control my dog, the man and his dog had gone. There is no way that he could have gone anywhere without us seeing him. The strange thing is that he looked like a normal living man, not transparent like in the movies.
The following story happened on the hill near the site of where St Stephen's Chapel once stood. This is Michael's story.
I was walking around the meadows one evening, coming from the side of the 5 tunnels. I walked past the ruins and noticed a white figure on the hill. It seemed to be gliding down the hill. As it got closer, I could see that it was a woman in a white dress with long dark hair. I didn't stay around to wait for her.
At one time, the town centre didn't have a church. Parishioners would walk down Prospect Hill, now Birmingham Road, and over to St Stephen's Chapel, which stood at the original gateway to Bordesley Abbey. The chapel was the only part of the abbey to survive the dissolution, and it was relocated to the Church Green in town centre in 1808. It was rebuilt in 1855. The church still has an original tiled floor from the abbey. Joe tells of a spooky encounter that happened in the early hours at the site of the original St Stephen's Chapel. When I was a teenager in the late 1990s, Myself and a group of friends used to walk all over Redditch and the surrounding areas. We were walking from Batchley and headed towards the site of the original St Stephen's Chapel, next to the track that leads to Abbey ruins. There was a low-lying mist across the meadows, and we commented on how it made the Abbey look spooky as it disappeared under the fog. It was around 2 a.m. and we were standing near the big tree that stands amongst the old graves, when we heard a loud noise that echoed across the meadows. It sounded like someone was using an axe to chop down a tree. It continued for around half an hour. We walked around but couldn't find the source. Redditch gains its name from the small stream that flows from the Batchley Brook. It has a dark orange colour caused from the red clay. Redditch grew around Bawdsley Abbey and would have been called Rubio Fossato in Latin, meaning red dyke. Evidence of an abandoned medieval village lies near to Dagnall End Lane that may have been part of the original village. In 2007, a group of paranormal researchers conducted an EVP experiment around different areas of the Abbey Meadows. EVP stands for Electronic Voice Phenomenon, and is believed to be the recordings of spirit voices or noises caused by spirits that are recorded but only heard on playback and not heard at the time. The following sounds were recorded.
That same jump scare. It's not 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 that same jump scare.
Look at the water, man. 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 Pregnancy. 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 Pregnancy.
Moon's Moat is an industrial estate on the eastern side of Redditch, and was named after a 12th century moated house that was situated on the Churchill estate. The house was inhabited by the Moon family, who were very influential during the medieval period. The house was rebuilt in the 16th century and used as a hunting lodge until the 18th century, when the place was left to ruin. Local folklore tells us that there was a suicide and a murder on the site, which may explain the many ghost stories. It is believed that Lady Moon took her own life on the 21st of January, which is known as the Eve of St Agnes, and she is believed to have been seen on that date every year.
When I was a kid in the 1970s, I was with a few mates playing around the Moon's Moat site. Back then we didn't know what it was. To us it was just a great place to climb trees and pretend to be soldiers in the jungle. I remember playing army with our cap guns and hiding behind a bush, ready to jump out on one of my mates. As I jumped out to attack my friend, there was a woman standing right in front of me. I was scared, as I thought I was going to get into trouble. The woman just walked on by as if she didn't even see me. Then she disappeared right in front of my eyes. It's still a vivid memory that I remember so clearly. I didn't ever want to play there again.
Many of the buildings along Church Green East were once houses, and they reflect on the wealth of the town in the Victorian era. Church Green East, Church Green West and Marketplace form a triangle enclosing St Stephen's Church and the Church Green. These roads may be medieval in origin and could have been used as trading points. In 2013, one of the properties on Church Green East opened as a bistro and the top floor as a music school. Previous to that, it had been a solicitor's and insurance broker, photography studio and a dentist's. Property started as a house in 1854, occupied by a family with servants.
It was a Sunday morning and it had been snowing. Myself and the drum teacher were setting up our equipment to test it all before we opened for business. I was in the guitar room and he was in the drum room when we heard a young boy shouting. It sounded like he shouted, "Dad, Dad," and it sounded like it was coming from downstairs. So I went down to see if someone had come in. We'd locked all the doors, the front and the back, so nobody could enter. There was no one around. I checked outside for footprints in the snow, and there was nothing, only our own footprints from the car to the door. Minutes after returning upstairs, we heard it again. I ran back down again. No one was there. But this time, as I reached towards the bistro door, it opened on its own and slammed very quickly. Around a month after opening, I was sat in the guitar room checking the progress of a student, when a young boy popped his head around the door, looking into my room. I said hello to the boy and he ran off. I went downstairs and there was no sight of any children. I asked one of the staff in the bistro if any children had been in, and they said that no children had been in all day. We checked the CCTV and saw nothing. At one time, one of my students turned up and asked who the little boy was in the waiting area. He said that there was a boy playing with toys that I'd left out for the children while waiting for a lesson. There was no boy to be seen. He would often see this boy when he arrived for a lesson. Many other people started telling me too that they'd seen the boy. After tidying up each night, I would put all of the toys away, only to find that they'd moved the next day. For some reason unknown, we named the ghost James. A few evenings each week, my wife would run the bistro, and I would stay behind and wait for her after lessons. One evening around 9 o'clock, a couple in their 30s came in. They ordered a drink, and the man asked where the toilet was, so I told him, up the first lot of stairs and to the left. Minutes later, he came running down the stairs, screaming in panic. He came into the bistro looking terrified. He said that as he came out of the toilet, there was a man stood in the doorway of the function room, which is on the first floor. He said that he was tall with broad shoulders and he was wearing what looked like an army trench coat. A few months later, I found out that an ex-soldier lived in the house in the 1950s and 60s. Other people saw this man too. They usually spoke to him as they thought he was a customer. The mother of one of my students was a medium. I've always been very sceptical about psychics and mediums, but she wanted to do a ghost hunt in the whole building. She said that she could feel the presence of 2 or 3 spirits. We went ahead with the event and places filled up very quickly. One of the experiments was to sit alone in each of the teaching rooms and to write down whatever entered your mind. The results were quite amazing. Most of the people in the guitar room wrote down Little Boy, James and Peter. When I looked through the census, I came across a family with the surname James, who lived in the house in the early 20th century. But no child was on it, so perhaps he was born and died in between the census.
At one time, 5 Church Green East was a solicitor's, which expanded and used property next door, Beech House. Beech House is one of the most noticeable properties on Church Green East. It was built in 1854 and was owned by the Warren family. Previous to living in this house, the family lived on Fish Hill, now Prospect Hill. Tragedy hit the household when the cook, Mary Evans, gave birth and disposed of the infant in the furnace. Joseph Warren, head of the family, founded the Eagle Works, which manufactured needles, whose premises may have been behind Beech House. Joseph died in 1879, leaving the company to his family. The house was occupied by the family until Joseph's 2 unmarried daughters died in 1925 and 1931. Over the years, many people have witnessed a lady wearing a white dress looking out of various windows of the upstairs of the property. She has also been seen walking around the bandstand and near to the water fountain. I used to work there when it was a solicitor's. It is definitely haunted. We used to have to lock 2 doors that led to 2 separate buildings. One night, as I put the key in the door, something pulled the door and it shook very violently, stopping me from locking it. I had to wait for 20 minutes before I could pluck up the courage to try it again. Luckily, it didn't happen again. The figure of a lady had been spotted at the top of the main staircase by various staff. I heard that a lady had hung herself in one of the rooms upstairs, and people have said that they have heard crying on regular occasions. I used to work there in the late 1980s to the early 1990s, and the staircase was definitely haunted. When carrying heavy folders, the weight of the folders would go. They didn't move, they became weightless as if someone else was helping me carry them. Also, the strong room, which is in the cellar, was haunted. The lights went off on me on numerous occasions, and files would also be moved. I always felt as if someone was watching me. The house on Church Green East, Redditch, now known as Webb House, dates from about 1774. It was probably owned by Mr. Peakman, who had a wire drawing business for the manufacture of needles. In the mid-19th century, maltster and corn dealer Ben Sarsons lived in the house for over 40 years with his wife and sister. When he died in 1887, another Redditch businessman, William Webb, saw the potential in the home and premises and planned to move his bakery and confectionery business from 33 Evesham Street. He moved in with his wife and young family in midsummer of that year, while the nation was celebrating 50 years of Queen Victoria's reign. Tragically, he died soon afterwards, and his brother, Thomas, took over the business. Thomas, his wife Catherine and their family lived above the shop and bakehouse until his death in 1917, when the business passed to his sons. Members of the Webb family lived and worked there until the mid-1950s, but the business of Webb and Sons continued at 20 Church Green East until 1988. Many of Redditch's older residents still remember the smell of freshly baked bread, or of buying seeds or pet food from the other branch of the business in Peakman Street. Webb House is now the home of Redditch Standard. An old lady in black Victorian-style dress with hair in a bun has been seen walking around the upstairs of the property looking very angry. She also stares out of the windows.
One evening, when working late in the office, I could hear somebody walking around. The floorboards were very creaky. I thought that it must have been a member of staff who hadn't gone home yet. When I went to look who was there, the place was empty. I checked downstairs and in all the other rooms, and nothing. No one was around at all, so I went back to the office. I spent another hour or so working. At this point, it was very dark outside, as it was winter. When I decided to leave, I locked the office door and a woman ran towards me really fast. She looked like she was in a foul mood, very angry. I was absolutely terrified. You could hear her loud footsteps as if she was stamping as she came towards me. Her hair was in a bun and she had a long black dress on. She had a very pale face with dark eyes. That was my only encounter with her, but other members of staff have seen her, and all have said the very same thing. She's angry and described the same clothes.
Plymouth Road Cemetery is on Cemetery Lane off Plymouth Road near to the town centre. It started in 1854 and covers 12 acres of land. Many of the old Redditch manufacturers are buried here with some very ornate memorial stones. The cemetery is now closed and has a preservation order.
In the 1980s, I was looking for the graves of my great-grandparents, who are buried in Plymouth Road Cemetery. I was walking near the chapel and noticed a lady in a white dress walking along the path near to the woods. She was in the place where I was walking towards, but as I got closer, she just disappeared.
I haven't been to Redditch for a few years now, but I used to love the peacefulness of Plymouth Road Cemetery. When I used to manage a shop in the Kingfisher Centre, I would get very stressed from the huge workload. Some days, on my lunch break, I would take a walk to the cemetery, as it's so peaceful. One day, as I approached the entrance near the war memorial, I noticed a woman standing at one of the graves. I didn't think anything of it until I got closer and she faded away. Very strange, but it never stopped me going back. The land in which Aberdale was developed on belonged to two farms. Easemore Farm, on Easemore Road, and Old Farm, which stood to the east of Arrow Road South, and was accessible from Beeley Road East. Easemore Road finished at a dead end, but had little lanes that led off to other small farms in the area. During Victorian times, Terry's Field was used as a recreation area and general meeting place. Only a small part of the field survives, but is still used for recreational activities. Aberdale was built following the Homes for Heroes pledge after the general election of 1951, and to help cope with the population boom. There were a lot of soldiers and migrants who lived on the estate after World War II. Many living in the prefabricated bungalows, some of which are still standing on Dolphin Road. The Aberdale Club in Woodfield Close was started in the 1950s by residents as a community and social club. In 2017, a decorator was working at the Aberdale Club's function room. He felt uneasy, as if someone was watching him, so he set up the video camera on his phone and left it recording. This is his footage. The club has a huge function room and is popular for all types of events, such as birthday parties and weddings. Many people have said that they have felt a presence when they have been preparing for a party. A few years ago, we booked the Aberdale Club for a private function, as it was such a large room. I was with my teenage children setting up the food in the skittle alley. We felt a cold presence. When we turned towards the door to go back into the function room, two of us saw a man walking through it away from us. He was tall, about 6'4", and very broad. Scared the hell out of us. He disappeared right in front of us. Members of staff have also had paranormal experiences. The doors at the back of the function room are pushed open when no one is in the club. Chairs have been moved. Noises come from the cellar, and the door in the bar area has been known to open on its own. An ex-barmaid of the club had an encounter in a house she lived in near to the club in Woodfield Close. When I was about 17 or 18 years old, I had a part-time job at the Aberdale Club. I was getting ready one night. I felt the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. I thought nothing of it at first. As I continued to dry my hair in the mirror, the face of a young man appeared next to me. His mouth was open as if he was screaming, but no sound came out. I ran all the way to the club, told them what happened.
I didn't even have any shoes on. A few of them went back to the house to find the door wide open and no one inside. This happened a few times when I lived at the property. When my niece used to stay at the property years before, she used to regularly see a figure standing in one of the bedrooms. As we know, children are playful. Perhaps they are still in the afterlife. When my brother and I were younger, we were in the back garden of my sister's old house in Woodfield Close. At the very end of the garden, the fence would dip down and you could see into the next garden. We saw a little girl there called Charlotte. We were playing all sorts of games with Charlotte like I Spy, but then we were called in for dinner. We took about 10 minutes, but we had told Charlotte that we would come and call for her after we had eaten. After dinner, we knocked on the door and Charlotte was not there. In fact, the people that lived there weren't English, and Charlotte was very much English. We had forgotten about this until recently, when we were thinking about it and telling old stories. The girl who told the previous story lived in a house in Sedgley Close, which is near to Woodfield Close. The family have had many paranormal experiences.
In the 90s, my wife and I moved into a house on Aberdale. On the first day of moving in, I saw a scruffy-looking, unshaven, middle-aged man standing in the garden, looking through the kitchen window. This is something that I would see a lot over a few years. Eventually, my wife and 3-year-old son started to see him. I had started to see him in the house too, usually walking through the kitchen wall from the window, into the hallway and through the stairs, until he disappeared into next door. A few years later, when my daughter was around 3 or 4, she started seeing a little girl who she would call Ballot. Numerous things would happen in the house, like the washing basket being found upside down, as if someone had thrown it. Banging in the day and night. A woman would walk down the hallway, and on numerous occasions, a child running around the house, banging on doors. We ended up seeking the help from a medium from Stevenage, who stayed with us for the weekend. As soon as she entered the house, she started telling us about an old man called Tom, who used to live in the area. She said that he was around because his favourite flowers weren't planted in the right place, the corner of our back garden. We planted them and we never saw him again. As she walked through the hallway, she said that there was a portal, a walkway for the spirits to enter our realm. She went upstairs and met my daughter. She picked up on a girl who had died from a fire. She said her name was Charlotte. She said that she was attached to my daughter, and over time she would leave her alone, which she now has. She said that Charlotte was also the child that was running around the house at night. The strange thing about this is that the medium was not told anything about it before. It was silent for a few years, but things are happening again now. It's been about 10 years since the medium visited us. The kids and myself keep seeing glimpses of a girl. I've seen the girl in the back garden and on the stairs. Not sure if it's the same girl, but I've seen her with what looks like a Burns mask on. And I've also seen her with a long black Victorian style dress, and her face was fine, smiling. She had shoulder length black curly hair. I have taken a photo towards the back door, and it looks like a girl in the window, half covering her face and some hair missing. We've also had people stay over, and they've experienced some odd things. My nephew stayed in the living room. He was 14 at the time. We didn't tell him about the ghosts. He woke in the night screaming that someone had walked into the room and sat on him. I couldn't pull him up. We've had objects appear as if from nowhere. Jewellery appear in the corner of the living room that doesn't belong to any of us. An old 50p piece fell onto the kitchen table from nowhere. Things have been moved around and put in unusual places. Very strange.
Part of Lakeside was developed on old farm and Holloway Farm, which was on the corner of what is now Arthur Street and Holloway Lane. Beeley Road and Prospect Road were built in Victorian times. Queen Victoria even visited a house on Prospect Road for tea. Beeley Road was originally called Beeley Lane. At the bottom of the road was Beeley Brook, where the road crossed part of the River Arrow. This was one of the main roads in and out of Redditch to Birmingham. The brook was a dangerous crossing where many fatal accidents occurred over the years, as it would often flood. One night, a group of teenage friends had a strange experience in the area. They learned not to mess about with things that they didn't understand.
I made a wooden Ouija board when I was at college in the 90s. My friends wanted to try it out, but not in any of our houses, so we decided to do it on the field, just after the river at the bottom of Beeley Road. Myself and another friend didn't use the board, we just observed. It was summer and we were able to light candles without them blowing out, and we put these around the board. After they used the board for a short while, it spout out a full name, including the middle name. The name was my friend's grandmother, who lived about 50 miles away. None of us knew her. Of course, this upset him. When he got home, he found out that his grandmother had died that very same evening. They stayed on the board for quite a while afterwards. Suddenly, a large gust of wind blew across the field without blowing the candles out. We could see something about 20 metres away that seemed to be climbing out of the ground. It ran through us all and seemed to be very tall. Of course, we ran away. Everyone went home. I took the Ouija board with me, but I didn't want to take it home. So I threw it in an old wooden garage on the wreck at the back of Sillins Avenue. The next day, I walked along the wreck to retrieve the board so that I could get rid of it properly, and the garage had burned down. I looked through the debris and found the board intact. I threw it deep into the bushes and never saw it again. The garage is gone now. Houses have been built where the garages stood.
I have lived in Lakeside for many years. The new house I am in now was built on old allotments. Not long after moving in, I started feeling that someone was watching me. I put it down to being in a new house and new surroundings. Then I had a friend over one evening. It was dark outside. He started to feel funny as soon as he walked in. We sat in the kitchen having coffee, and his chair was kicked at the bottom of the legs, swinging him out and spilling his coffee. I grabbed a cloth to clean up. Looking out of the window, we could see a man standing and staring at us. He was looking very angry. This freaked my friend out. I went to turn the outside light on at the back door so I could see who he was. I opened the curtains and he was right outside the door, staring right at us. He was dressed in 16th century clothes, well-to-do. I closed the curtains quickly and we backed away from the door. The door started to shake, then it stopped. My friend left. He was too scared to stay. I finally went to bed, but I felt like there was someone there. I was on my own at the time. Not much happened for a few months, but then when my boyfriend at the time used to stay, he would wake up to a guy standing in the bedroom door, which I could see too. He was wearing a long coat. We could never see his face as it was too dark. No menace was felt by me, but my partner used to feel like it was threatening him. I also used to have things move around. When my daughter was younger, she used to get woken up by a girl's laugh. She would be so tired in the morning due to being woken up a lot. Then the door handles in her room would start to rattle, like someone was shaking the handle. The door would actually bang, and then all of a sudden it would stop. The doors still bang now with rattling handles. We definitely have several ghosts there. Farm Road is southeast from Sillins Avenue and ends at Arthur Street. These houses were built before World War II on land that once belonged to Holloway Farm.
In the 1980s, My sisters and me used to visit our grandparents and stay overnight at the weekend. Nan used to put the electric blanket on while we were sat downstairs, eating cheese and crackers for supper, whilst watching Match of the Day. When our Nan put us to bed, she would put on loads of blankets and took us in tight. You could not move, and the heat used to send us to sleep in minutes. On a few occasions, we would see shadows walking around the walls. They wouldn't be from outside, as the curtains were shut and there was no light at the back of the house. My granddad had a plant on the windowsill at the top of the stairs. Many times we would wake up and find it on the banister.
Another story from Farm Road.
From when I was about 5 years old, I used to play a lot in my bedroom. I used to play with another little boy who had dark hair, similar looking to myself. I never knew his name, as he never made a sound. I never mentioned anything to my parents until years later. When I told my mum about it, she said that before we moved into that house, a young boy had died from a brain tumour.
Winston Close was built in the 1970s. It was built between Sillins Avenue and Kingsley Avenue. It is believed that there was a row of 3 cottages along here that were destroyed by fire in the early 20th century.
During the 90s, we lived in a house at the top half of Winston Close, just behind Sillins Avenue. At first, we started to see a misty shape that looked like a skirt. Eventually, we started to see a woman with a skirt on, walking in various parts of the downstairs of the house. One day, I'd been playing outside with some friends when we went back to our house to get a drink. As we all stood in the hallway, the pedals on my bike started to spin very fast. We all ran out, and my mum was just shocked. We had a big war unit in the living room, and we all used to take it in turns to remove all of the many ornaments to polish it. One day, when one of the shelves had been polished and everything put back, one of the ornaments slowly turned around. This became a regular occurrence, until one day, we were all sat in the living room watching TV, when the same ornament flew across the room like someone had thrown it. One night, I walked up the stairs and saw a little boy walking down towards me. I was terrified. This would happen on a regular basis. Even my very sceptical dad would see him. One day I was at my friend's house, who lived 3 doors away, when there was a knock at the door. She answered, and there were 3 children stood there. One of the boys asked if I knew where his mommy was. I looked out of the door and noticed that it was the boy I'd seen in our house, with another boy and a girl. Other neighbours in the area used to talk about the little boy coming to their house too, looking for a ball. I told my granddad about it, and he said there used to be a row of cottages on the same site when he was a child. He said that there was a bad fire that took all of the cottages, and 3 children were killed in the blaze. Perhaps the mother we used to see was the mother of the 3 children, and she was looking for them.